Good Friday morning, Northstate. Preston, Donion here in the Weather Center, breaking down the latest on some of those significant fires across the region. We'll first look at hotspots and perimeters, the distances to our communities, then we'll talk about the wind and smoke, and then finally a little bit of fire behavior and what kind of drives activity in certain situations. So let's zoom in first on the green fire. You can see a ton of hotspots around that perimeter, mainly to the north and to the south, and that's kind of consistent with what we'd expect, right? We have had pretty decent north winds throughout your Thursday into early Friday. And again, that area in pink is the map perimeter. The area in red is hotspots detected when they flew over by satellite early this morning on Friday. So what you see there, again, kind of reflects some of the behavior that they talk about in the Incident Management Situation Report. We've got backing when the fire moves kind of against the direction of the wind, and then you've got flanking where the fire moves parallel to the wind direction. So that kind of shows up, right? We had that north wind, so that would drive fire activity to the south, but some of that fire crept to the north. And then you also get some uphill runs out there, right? This is a very rugged area of terrain and tons of dense vegetation, which also can lead to torching, where you have fire kind of igniting a tree and then creeping up the crown, and then from crown to crown spread at the higher portions of a tree rather than kind of trunk to trunk. Sometimes you can get those higher branches kind of igniting down the line. And so that's the fire behavior we're seeing there on the green fire, close to 6,000 acres as of last report on Thursday night when this was mapped, and it's been an active one for days now. Still worth watching. And you still got to watch the Summit fire. This morning announced that about 620 acres, roughly speaking, on this one, some containment on it, and that's going to come from that northern end of the fire. That's where we're seeing very quiet conditions for a few days in terms of satellite detected hotspots, but you do see a few of those on the south end of the fire related to that north wind that's going to drive fire activity, even though most of what we're seeing with these lightning fires this current round is really driven by the terrain. These are in very rugged environments, and so you have that element of fire wanting to move uphill, and then winds can be very different in little tiny micro valleys and things than they are across the large scale. So that's kind of a rough explanation, but it doesn't tell the full story of what's going on out there. Now we take a look at the Butler fire, and this is one that has really grown rapidly throughout the course of the week. You can see those hotspots really wrapping all the way around the perimeter, and it's a complex perimeter, and that reflects this difficult terrain that this fire is burning in, right? You can see kind of in the middle there of this pink area, there's a hole. There's a hole in the fire perimeter. And then there's two separate areas mapped out, right? There's a gap between that main group of fire measurement, and then there's another one further south. But those hotspots are all around. So this is continuing to grow in all directions, and this is one where they describe particularly active fire behavior. You have that backing, right? So going against the wind. You have flanking, where it's going parallel to the wind, and then you also have those uphill runs. This is in really, really, hilly and valley-filled terrain, and so uphill runs happen because fire loves to run uphill, and it's going to do it quickly. Why that happens is, think about it, in your house, if you didn't have the AC on, that second floor is where that heat rises to. And so if we have fire burning at the base of a hill, the heat from that fire rises up, and it's going to dry out the vegetation and warm its temperatures, so it's much more primed to ignite. Think about that, right? Tall grasses that are sitting at 120, 140 degrees because there's fire just below it is certainly more ready to catch fire itself than maybe 80 or 90 degree grass that hasn't been dried out fully because of that fire right down the line. So that's where those uphill runs come in. They can be really rapid, and that's where you see some of these kind of fire perimeters shooting off into little arms because the fire can take advantage of the topography. That's the story with the Butler fire. Now let's take a look at distances to communities, starting again with the green fire. And this is my very rough estimate, right? We can look at those outlines of those fire perimeters, and we can draw a rough line to our communities and get an idea. And I purposefully make these a little bit pessimistic, right? These numbers aren't exactly what you're seeing from the very edge of the fire to the very edge of the community. It's the low end estimate because that fire is mapped out at night. Then we go dark. They can't fly over, they can't detect that full perimeter until we do it again during the day. And so sometime mid and late morning, you get a mapping, and then you get another one in the evening. And that's when those acreages and those fire perimeters are updated. But overnight, we go dark. And so this is from Thursday night. We don't know how much the fire's grown. Best to be pessimistic and be careful about what we're saying. We don't want to overestimate how far away that fire is. So that's what you're seeing here with that rough 8 miles to Montgomery Creek, 7 miles to Round Mountain, just there along 299. Now, along Highway 3, these communities have really good good distance from the Summit fire, which is the larger and really only still very active fire in the Marble Complex, right? The Jacket fire has really quieted down, and that's good news. They've got that to 96% containment as reported this morning. And we've got over 10 miles away from the Summit fire, which is still active kind of along the southern half of the fire. But again, 11 miles to Greenview, 12.5 miles to Etna. That's good news there. Shifting to the Butler fire, and now that we don't have those hot spots on there, you can really see how complex the geometry of this fire is, right? You can see where it's taking advantage of hillsides and making strong runs. All these things that it's been doing that are going to continue. And you can see that spot fire to the south that's grown to be pretty large in its own right, all part of the larger Butler fire, and this is a part of the Orleans complex. There's Red Fire up in Del Norte County. That's one where we haven't seen any hotspots in a while. Still fairly large, over 100 acres, but it hasn't seen hotspots detected in the past couple days, so that is good news in terms of firefighters finally being able to go on offense and get out there and shut things down. But with the Butler fire, we've got some pretty close distances to communities. That 3 miles is measuring to Forks of Salmon in Siskiyou County, pretty close. We're watching that, of course. And these are just major communities, right? Some of that fire perimeter is much closer to a couple campgrounds. There's the Nordheimer campground there. You've also got the Butler Creek community, which is a very, very rural, isolated area, but there are some folks that live there. And so fire crews have been working diligently to, do structure protection and make sure that those fire lines don't creep any further off to the east into those communities. You've got 4 miles measured to Orleans there in Humboldt County and Soames Bar, about 5 miles away from that last mapped fire perimeter. Now let's talk about the impacts that maybe everybody's feeling, because these fires are close to some communities, but even if you're not close to them, you've seen that smoke out there. We had really predominant north winds across the region throughout Thursday, and so that carried a lot of that down further south than we had seen earlier in the week. Today, that changes just a little bit. As we head into the afternoon, you'll notice a slight south breeze making its way up I-5 and into places like Butte and Glenn counties, where you might get that air quality a little bit better for the second half of the day than you're seeing this morning. We've definitely seen unhealthy air out there all down I-5 and Highway 99, and so that's a concern. In Trinity County, you're not going to have as much luck, right? That northwest wind is going to be carrying smoke directly from the Butler fire into places like Weaverville, like Junction City, Hayfork. You're going to be dealing with that really all day long, unfortunately, at least in a hazy form, if not surface smoke. And that haze is just going to be out there for everyone, as I'll show you in just a moment. The good news, though, along the north coast, good clean air coming in out of the northwest and off of the ocean. You couldn't ask for much better of a setup there. Now, as we roll through into your early Saturday, that north wind drains back down into the valley, and so air quality will continue to be poor in Shasta, Tehama, Trinity counties in particular, and you will see some eastern mountain communities deal with some bad air as well. Here's what that smoke forecast looks like, right? At noon today, we're seeing things start to disperse a little bit as the wind speeds pick up, and so you kind of can get rid of that cluster of smoke kind of settling into places. It kind of disperses out, and we kind of dilute it, if you will. But you're starting to see activity pick up on the Butler and Green fires, and those are areas where you're going to see really dense smoke near or right on top of the fires into the afternoon and evening when they're making their most active runs and they're seeing their most active behavior. But we have predominant westerly winds aloft, not at the surface, but as you go up in the air where that smoke is rising into, they're going to hit some west winds, and that's going to carry smoke off to the east. So that's what you're kind of seeing there as we get into the 6 o'clock window, and then as we carry through into early Saturday, that segs a little further south, right? That drainage wind will carry things into Weaverville, Redding, Red Bluff, and everybody's going to wake up to a hazy sky at the very least on Saturday, if not poor air quality out there as well. Final thing I want to talk about is one of these things that drives fire and smoke behavior, and that is the inversion. We talk about this often on Daybreak, where a place like Paradise is warmer than it is down in Chico, or Shingletown being warmer than Redding. This happens when we have really stable atmospheric conditions, aka high pressure overhead. Now, the normal scenario is that you've got warm air down at the surface, and as you go up in the terrain, things cool off. But an inversion is a reversal of that, where that warm air gets trapped above colder air. And this can really drive fire behavior in interesting ways. First of all, that inversion creates a lid, and it kind of puts a lid on the smoke. And so often you can look at some high elevation fire lookout cameras, and you'll be above the smoke. And then there's valleys that are filling in. It's just kind of pouring through where it can. That's that lid. That is the inversion, where you've got warmer air above, and so the smoke can't rise because the air above it is warmer than the smoke, and things are buoyant, right? Warm air rises, but if the air above it is warmer, then it's just going to cap out and spread out. This also determines some fire behavior. If you've got an inversion hanging out in one of these smaller valleys, like you're seeing here in a dramatic image of Shasta Lake, right? We've kind of exaggerated the terrain, but in that setting, if you have an inversion, you've got some warmer hillsides, that's where we can get a thermal belt. That's the terminology that fire crews those use, where you've got really warm air throughout the day and at night, and so fire activity can thrive in these thermal belts, in that inversion zone, even in the overnight hours, whereas down in the lower portions of the valley where that cold air pools, you can see some moderation of fire activity for at least a couple hours. That's the story of the fire situation this morning, Friday, July 11th. Thank you for your time. Stay safe out there and stay cool as we navigate a very hot weekend.